welcome everyone to the How to Work with the Media panel. This is going to be split up. I'm Pat Bingham, and this is going to be split up into two parts. The first part is our fellow employees talking about their experiences, good and bad, and some tips for how to work with the media. And the second part is going to be a panel of people from the media who are from all the radio and newspapers in the Valley, talking about how they can work best with us and what are some of the roadblocks that they run into and how we can make their jobs easier and maybe they can make our jobs easier. So I think I'll just introduce the panel. We've got County Manager John Peacock here, Janice Voss-Caudell, Clerk and Recorder's Office, Gary Tenenbaum, the Director of Public Open Space and Trails, Karen Kenneman, Public Health Director, and John Kinney, the Director of the Airport. And you can only imagine that in their experience they've had some encounters with the media and learned a lot from it. So I'm going to kick it off with John, and he's going to tell us about his experience, and then we'll just go down the line from there. How's that?
That's great. Thanks, Pat. And I think we probably have a number of people streaming this. We definitely don't have as many people in the audience as we did last time we did this. Maybe our panel 2 years ago was so thorough that we're already up to speed as an organization. But we like to do this kind of panel every couple of years because as an organization, we take a different approach than some. We don't have a gatekeeper. We don't, whenever we get a media request, we don't ask Pat to deal with all of them or what have you. We really try and encourage our employees to respond and be transparent, but in doing that, it also puts a lot of responsibility on our employees. And so we like from time to time just to sit down and both talk about our expectations and how we work with the media, and then hear from our friends in the media about how we can better interface with them. Do you mind switching that? I always like to start off with kind of my perspective. May hit an N on there, Pat. N. The letter N. Okay, that's not working either.
Sorry, guys.
The up-down.
Up-down arrow?
Up-down arrows over there. Or left-right.
Okay, well,
Left-right. Left-right.
I hope YouTube is working better than my PowerPoint presentation right now. This always happens to me. It's really kind of amazing. So the slide that's going to come up is a quote from Alexis de Tocqueville, specifically talking about the press. And de Tocqueville published Democracy in America all the way back in 1839. And it remains one of the most comprehensive and relevant analyses of the dynamic between the creation of basically a new country and the government that it interfaced with in American society. And de Tocqueville was interested in the role of the local press in the United States versus other countries, and really particularly in the local press. And it was really unique and remains unique in the United States to have local media that really represents all these little unique pockets, local communities. If you go to other European countries and such, you tend to see more national media outlets. Here, you tend to see more local government outlets. And that's because local papers or radio stations or television stations, which we don't have, they tend to reflect the uniqueness of a community and also to influence decisions locally. And since we have a really strong local government system in the United States, local media is particularly important because a lot of decisions are made at the local level. And de Tocqueville observed that, in his time is really newspapers, so no offense to our radio and other media in the room, but he said, nothing but a newspaper can drop the same thought into 1,000 minds at the same moment. A newspaper is an advisor that does not require to be sought, but that comes of its own accord and talks to you briefly every day of the common weal without distracting you from your private affairs. And he went on to say that this was such an important role in local governments that to suppose that they, newspapers, only serve to protect freedom would be to diminish their importance. They maintain civilization. So why do we talk about how we interact with the press and have a focus on this is really as a fourth estate in terms of how we do our business, and is extremely important to just kind of the common weal and conversations that happen in our community. So, do you mind? I'm going to talk on two different levels because I think there's a real difference when we're dealing with our local media and if we're dealing with national media outlets. I've had a little bit of experience with both, and I think the rules are a little bit different, frankly, for dealing with both. So in terms of simple rules for working with the local press, these are really obvious, probably, but I'm going to go ahead and talk a little bit about them anyway. So first, always tell the truth, never fake it. If you give a false, or even just incorrect information to a reporter or media outlet, it can be really, really difficult, not just for you, but for the organization you're representing to regain credibility. It's just so important that you're always honest and you never fake it. And I have a lot of confidence that we're always honest, but it can be really, really scary if you're not used to dealing with the press and you're getting interviewed and you don't know the answer and you really think you should, to say something. Don't fake it. Give yourself some room to say, you know what? I'm not sure about that detail, or I may not be the right one to ask. Let me get that information for you, because the local media, the reporter, is far more interested in getting it right than not getting the correct information. So always tell the truth, never fake it. Pretty obvious. The second one, particularly the way that we manage media relations, is probably more important for you to think about, since we don't really, except in some limited circumstances I'll talk about, we generally don't have kind of a gatekeeper model, right? And because of that, we're really asking our employees, a lot of you who are watching this, to make a determination whether you're the best one to respond to a press inquiry. And it's really good that we don't have a gatekeeper model in some ways. It promotes transparency, but another way it puts more responsibility on you. So if you are getting an inquiry and you're not absolutely sure that you're the right one to respond to it, don't. Go ahead and refer it up the chain, or refer it to someone who may be in a better position to respond. Roll it up to your supervisor. I'll talk about this in a second. Help the reporter get to the right place, right? But if you think you may not be the right one to respond to an inquiry, don't put yourself in the position of responding to that. There are a few circumstances where the county does use kind of gatekeeper models. If we're responding to an emergency situation and we're using an incident command model, or we've stood up an emergency operations center, in those cases we have established really specific protocols about how the press is to interact and get their information to report back out to the public. And who is supposed to be speaking on behalf of the organization. That is really, really critically important. In an emergency situation, things are fluid and information is evolving quickly. And one of the worst things we can do as an organization in an emergency situation is get out inconsistent or incorrect information. It happens all the time. It's really in emergency response, I think in other jurisdictions, I think we've done a good job of managing that. But in those cases, you got to make sure that any inquiries are being pointed to the right place, either through the Joint Information Center and Emergency Operations Center kind of situation, or through the incident commander if we're kind of in that profile. Your department heads, your departments, if you have special kind of circumstances coming up, may also designate a spokesperson. In that case, you're probably not the right person to respond to requests. Go ahead and do that. Get that to them. Staying on message, that's probably pretty obvious too, but again, if you're not used to responding to press inquiries, one of the things that you're going to want to spend a little bit of time doing is knowing what your message is and kind of sticking to it, not wandering off too much, because you can sometimes create some confusion or a story that maybe isn't to the point of what you were trying to communicate. And again, always give yourself room. If you're unsure of something or you're not quite sure how to respond, go ahead and let the reporter know that you want to take a little bit of time to make sure you've got your facts straight. Helping reporters do their job. It is a tough time to be a journalist, I think, right now. The news industry is going through its own disruption, some of it because of social media, which many of you are probably watching this on right now. And then also just because of, frankly, our political climate right now. And so it's a tough time. And so across the board, fewer reporters are being asked to do more work. And they need some help. And so as an organization, I want county staff to be viewed as a resource to help our particularly local media get the job done, rather than another barrier or adversary that's keeping them from getting their job done. So a few things to think about there. Be sure we're providing them with the best information that we have as an organization and help them find it. To the best of our ability, and I know everyone's busy and I'm guilty of this from time to time, return calls, return texts, return emails in a timely fashion. Try to figure out what a reporter's deadline is. Try and get a response in or information, or let them know when you can have information relevant or relative to that deadline. And then if you're not the right person to get them there, again, help them find the right person. Another thing that we can do is, if you have a regular kind of interaction with a reporter, figure out what kind of stories they like to write. And if there's something coming up that's of interest, let them know. And then finally, and I think this is most important, and it's a pothole a lot of us sometimes step into, never hold information or refuse to respond to a reporter's inquiry because you didn't like their last story or what was written or what was said. It can be really tempting sometimes to circle the wagons. From time to time, we're all going to have some frustration with the way a story is presented. Sometimes it's because we just wish those facts weren't out there. Other times it's because we thought they should have been represented differently. This is like a baseball batting average, though, is the way you got to think of it. You know, when you're batting .300, which is hitting the ball 30% of the time, you're a rock star, right? That's also kind of how it is sometimes in the public sector when you have so many different ideas and perspectives out there. When you're agreeing 30% of the time, those are your friends, okay? So never hold the previous story, never hold information hostage because of a previous story, I guess is the basic advice. And then finally, we're in a small community. It's always important to be friendly, but remember, If you're a reporter's friend, they also have a job to do regardless of that friendship. You should assume that anything you say can end up in print or on the air. And so be careful about the casual questions at the end of an interview. What do you really think about this or what have you? Oftentimes when you go off point after an interview, you think an interview is done, you distract from the main points or the story. Same goes for emails or electronic communications. Don't write something that you don't want to see. And then finally, and for the most part, I don't recommend going on background or off the record, but there are times where it's appropriate. If you're asked or if you ask to go on background or go off the record, just be sure that there's agreement on what that means. You don't want to put a reporter in a position of saying something they'd really like to use and then say, well, oh, that was off the record. Yeah, that's not fair play on our end. It's really important to establish those ground rules up front. And every reporter does that differently. Generally speaking, when you're going on background, that generally means that the reporter can use the information without necessarily attributing it directly to you. When you're going off the record, it means you're giving information that can't be used in a story, but could help inform a future interview or a future story for the reporter. Generally, like I said, best to stay on record, but if you're describing a complex kind of issue and you don't think you've got it nailed down, going on background or such is okay. Just make sure you know what the ground rules are, because every reporter I've worked with, it's been a little different. And so you can establish that as you go on. Do you mind? So the working with national media outlets I find really different. And generally, our local news outlets, we have ongoing relationships with. We're in a community together. We want to maintain those relationships with one another. And in this community and other local communities I've worked in, the media, the reporters have always had the best of intentions in terms of representing local news and information, and we should have the best of intentions of getting that information out. I'm a little bit more skeptical of the national media, to be honest, and there are limited circumstances where we may have to deal with the national media. For the most part, it is the same as working with the local media. You'll see a lot of those same rules in a different order. The one thing that is different, though, is when you have a national media outlet come in, you do not have that same ongoing relationship that you do with a local outlet. And what I've found is you have to watch for sensationalism versus community interest. You no longer have that local community interest in common. There tends to be a little bit more sensationalism. My experience, which I have some photos of up here, is as Matthew Shepard's advisor at University of Wyoming. He was a gay student who was killed, caused a huge months and months of, years actually, of media coverage. I still get calls about this. And I had zero experience dealing with the press. I was an instructor. I was 26 years old at the time. He was my student and my advisee, and the national media descended on Laramie and the town, as well as the university. And so the first time my wife's or my in-laws saw me was on Nightline News, in fact. But one of the things I learned through that experience is each media outlet actually had already come to the community with a storyline in mind. And it usually had very little to do with representing what was actually happening in the local community. And so understanding that and feeling free to ask in some cases what that storyline is with the national media, I think is a fair game, and then you can really decide, are you the right one to respond? I learned that lesson the hard way, because I was not the right one to respond at 26, and first-year employee, and I did to every media outlet, and it wasn't always appropriate. And the stories that came out weren't always the ones that I expected. So when working with the national media, just be aware of that, and you may want to push that, those types of inquiries up the line a lot quicker, okay? Otherwise, the rules really remain the same. So that's all I've got.
So I'm sitting here thinking, phew, I'm not going to say anything adverse from what you just reviewed. So John, our teacher. So Pam asked me to join you today. I'm the Pickens County Clerk and Recorder, and what I do is oversee elections, motor vehicle titling and registration, and land use recording for all our real estate within the county. And I'm going to review with you what Pat asked me to review, and if I do a good job, thank Pat. If I don't, I'll do better next time. So what she asked me to do review with you today is what are the pros and cons of dealing with the media? And how do I prepare? And give a situation when you were not prepared, and how did that feel and what happened? Also, what are some tips that you've learned over the years? And what are some tough tips that you learned, the tough time? So I've got a story for you there as well. But I'm also include other tips as well that I've learned personally, because there's no training on this. You learn through working with your media and over time. Okay, and you learn from your mistakes naturally. And the last thing is what I've learned. So here we go, Pat. So based on what I've been asked is what are some pros and cons in working with the media? And pros are you get to tell your story, right? You're the expert. You get to tell a story about what you do. Also, it's an opportunity to educate the community about what you do and better service your community. And obviously, I think what we do is riveting. I am kind of strange that world. I think what we do is the center of the universe, because obviously, democracy. We're the backbone of democracy. We control the richest real estate in the United States. And motor vehicle, my gosh, we collect taxes that build the infrastructure of what we drive on, roads and bridges. So that's how I feel about my department, and that's why I like to talk about it. Cons that I've experienced in working with the media is error news stories. But how I view it is, what can I learn from it? What can I do better next time? And I'll share with you a little bit later of what I've learned about myself and what I can do better. The other thing is, it is inevitable. If you are 3 feet under and looking at the hole in the sky, when am I going to get out of this workload? And you're chasing deadlines and statutory deadlines, and everybody's coming at you from every direction. That is ultimately when a reporter will want your time. And all you want to do is say, I got to do my work, and that's your focus. And it's difficult. And I've changed my attitude 180 degrees, so I will share that with you as well. And the other thing that's difficult is you want to tell a story. There may be misinformation out there. Can we say elections? And you want to tell a story, so it's hard to get the story out there. And again, remember, I think it's riveting. So of course I think the story should be out there. So those are some pros and cons that I experienced. I've also been asked, when have you felt prepared? And what about when you were unprepared? And what happened? And I'll share with you a story of unprepared. Several years ago, press got a hold of a voter registration, a letter that I received from a group, lawyers representing the group, and just information. Every other year, now in odd years, I get this letter. It's kind of routine. But the letter was from Project Vote or Public Interest Legal Foundation or True the Vote. The question was, why do you have more people registered in your county than you have potential opportunity of those people who should be registered in the county? What's going on with your registration rolls, right? So immediately I did what John said don't do, is you try to answer the questions the best you can. And the appropriate thing would have been, you know what, that letter's on my desk. I haven't had an opportunity to review it. Let me review it. Let me talk to the Secretary of State. And let me help you. I'll get back to you. That would have been appropriate. But of course, reading the article the next day in the paper, you're cringing, but you learn from it, right? So you go from there, and you move on. If you do what John mentioned and I just mentioned, you are moving into the story more comfortable. You know what the story is about. You've prepared. You know what questions that probably want to be asked, and you can better help with that story. So those are prepared, not prepared. And don't be afraid to say, I don't know. Let me find out. It always works. The third thing I want to share with you are tips and trades and answering tough questions. And I want to share with you tough questions we deal with, and I think a lot of us up here deal with, is when you're called by a reporter. Well, let me set the scene, the story. So we often work with agency partners, jurisdictions, organizations, etc. And in my line of business, we receive workload, or we're asked for information or workload that we are requested and provide. Now keep in mind, our department is detail-oriented. Every detail counts. We document everything, all right? And anything we get before we do something, we probably need to document to sign something. So we do keep detailed information. And when it's difficult when there's misinformation or there's an error out there, and a reporter calls you about the error, the best you can do is you know the statutes, you know your operations, you know the laws, you know your work. The best you can do is provide facts. The best you can do is direct them to the other agency to continue the conversation. Okay? I can review my operations, I can review what we do. Sometimes it's disheartening, the outcome, and sometimes you got to let it go. And sometimes when your sister tells you there's karma out there, you just embrace it and move on, correct? Karma. So you take the high road and you're professional, and you deal with the facts and you know your profession. The other tips I want to share with you is go back and review your stories. Look at them. See what you can do better next time. And improve. Look at the videos. It's always process improvement. You learn from yourself. You learn from others. The second thing is, I think, know yourself. And what do I mean by yourself? Know yourself. So I'll use myself as the example, the poster child of what not to do or be, is I am a detail-oriented person. I love what we do, and I want to tell everybody about every gory, gazillionth detail. And my mind operates like a abacus on steroid, because it's all going up here, and I just want to spew it out to the recorder, every single detail. And what I've learned about myself is that's not telling a story, okay? That's kind of regurgitating too much to that poor reporter that's trying to capture that. And what I can do better is ask the reporter, what's your story about? How can I help you? Then I can pull the information that they want, or I can direct them to the information they want. But knowing yourself, for me personally, is I need to pull myself out of the detail and look at the bigger picture, a story. So that's an example of know yourself. We all have strengths and weaknesses. You learn to work with them and you move on and try to help the reporter or the news media best you can. Another thing I learned, a postchart of what not to do, is if you see an error in the story, don't call that reporter every time you see a little error in that story. They don't want to hear it. They're doing the best they can. But if you see an error in the story that needs to be corrected publicly, then call them. And they will certainly work with you to correct it, and it's appreciated. The bottom line is, for me, you are my customer. And it's important that I'm available to you. It's important that I'm accurate with my facts. It's important that I partner with you, that I listen to you, that I try to help you. And it's important that I know I'm the expert. And I'm educating you, and I'm educating my public, and I'm helping you to do so as well. Okay. The last thing on tips I want to provide is create tools. You know, online, create tools so the reporters can do research. Lead them to that. Create a weekly bulletin when you go through, for example, elections, so we can give that information out automatically. And they don't need to rely on us and our time. Understand the papers or the media's deadlines, so you can work with them to help get them as much as you can, so they have the most for their story. So provide the tools for them. So what I've learned over the course of time is that It's important to go back to what John said earlier, is build a rapport. You know, be calm. Know who your reporters are, your media is. And I am always happy. Call me on the weekend. If you're writing a story and I know you talked to me on Friday and you want information, call me on the weekend. Call me 10 times if you're not feeling it's accurate and you want it to be accurate. I would rather have it be accurate, and so would you. Because the bottom line is, we're all trying to do the best we can. You are my customer. We're trying to do the best we can, and we're trying to do the best for our community.
All
Okay?
of us agree you should call Janice on the weekend.
I won't. Call me on the weekend. Yeah. So tell the story, ask what the story is, help tell it, and maintain your professionalism. And actually, it's fun. And it's fun working with you, and thank you for everything you do.
Oh, thank you.
Phew! Pat, good job.
You've come a long way, baby.
Well, from my perspective, for open space and trails, it seems like the public overall is really interested in what we do, and really truly want to hear about the stuff. And what I've learned over the last 17 years of working with the Open Space Department and the media is really truly, you want to tell the story. We should be telling the story. Government is an open book. Everything we do in government is open. Our meetings are open. We do minutes. Right now we get a lot of our meetings televised. And so the media is watching, and it provides them with a story. And what I've learned over time is, I used to I'd get the phone call and I'd see, okay, Curtis is in there. I see Curtis calling and I have his number already programmed into my cell phone. Ignore. And then he'd leave a message, hey, it's Curtis, and I'd love to talk to you about Castle Creek. And I'd think about it for a while. And then if I sometimes forgot to respond and the story comes out the next day, I go, oh, that's not what I wanted to say. That's not what I wanted in that paper. And it's my fault, because in the end, we need to be telling the story. And that's my biggest tip to everybody in the county is, and make sure you call them back. Develop that rapport, call them back. Even if you can't have time to talk to them, just say, hey, sorry, I got your message. Can I call you at a different time? When is your deadline? Find out when they're going to write that story. Because if it's the next day, you need to find the time to provide them with the information for that story. But sometimes they're like, oh, I'm trying to do it for the weekly, or I might do it on Friday. And so if you just call them back right away, or you pick up the phone, knowing that you're not going to potentially talk about something, it's critically important to communicate back. And I picked on Curtis, but there's others that I've done that to. And I feel bad because in the end, if the story comes out and I didn't say anything, and it came out with other people's comments and not from the county itself, and maybe it's it's a management plan they're dealing with or something else, I feel like the public did not get the full story, and then another story has to be written sometime in the future or not. And the reality is that information is kind of important for what we do, because we usually want to get public feedback on all the things that we do. So that's my number one thing, is to make sure when they do call you, is to call them right back. If you have a county cell phone, it's okay to give them your cell phone, because you want to be available. I personally do not like getting phone calls on Saturday and Sunday, so Janice has a county cell phone and she'll take them. But honestly, if it's a big deal, you got to talk on a Saturday or Sunday. If it's not a big deal, then it usually can wait till Monday. And so for me, that's one of the biggest things I really want to stress, is to make sure you call them back and you really reach out to them, because they're going to write the story, and they're going to write it with what you say or with not what you say. And you might as well get what you want to say in there, because in the end, you look at it, and yeah, a few times they've definitely played with the stuff I said, and I don't love exactly the story that was written, but at least my part was out there. and I was able to say that. So, for me, that's a big thing. Just yesterday, and I'll probably be on 9 News tonight, John was talking about federal, like not federal, but like nationwide, but there's also state. So 9 News, Denver Post, they are all part of the AP network, and they get what the Aspen Times and the Daily News writes, and all of a sudden if they like the story, and this one's on Penny Hot Springs, they're going to try to contact you, and they want to answer relatively quickly. Definitely call them back and either tell them like, hey, let's set up a time to talk, or if you're ready to talk about it then. But what I do, and we'll see how this one comes out tomorrow, but what I try to do with a state person that I've never met before, I never know, I try to stay to the questions that they ask. And that is critically important. And they try at the end, anything else you'd like to add? And I go, no. And I do no on purpose because I don't want to add anything because it's going to get in there. It's not like I have the relationship with one of the local people and they're like, that's probably not. Or they might like it and they pop it out there. And if you see it, and it's a statewide thing, so everybody in the state's going to see it. And you kind of go, did I want to say that? And secondly, know that the story you're saying is going to a much bigger audience. And so like on Penny Hot Springs, I was hoping they wouldn't write the story because I don't want more people showing up. But the reality is they have a story they want to tell, and it's public. We're an open book. Government is open. We're doing management plans, and they see it, and at least get it right. So, I think a lot of the time, people in my office, and I try to work with everybody in your office, and if you don't feel comfortable, definitely go to your supervisor and say, hey, can you take this one? Because I've had staff say things in the newspaper I wish they didn't say. And they're not in trouble, and there's no issues with that, but it sets up the program or your department to have, potentially, I got to go correct that, or I got to go fix that, or, it's unintended consequences of what has in the paper. The great thing is, and one of the other little tips is what I've learned too, is you might think it's the biggest deal in the world that story came out and there's a buzz around it, but within a week or two, it's gone. It's gone. Within a month, it's completely gone, and within a year, you don't even remember it, because that's how fast the news things go, is basically, within a week or 2 or 3, it's old news, and you'll be like, oh, I was so anxious about that whole thing, and then magically it's out of the newspaper, it's done. So, the reality is stories seem big right away, the buzz hits, all of a sudden I get a phone call from one of the VOCC and be like, hey, what was that in the paper? And you're just like, okay, it's just give it a few days, give it a week, and it just kind of calms down. But, the reality is that's why you want to get the story right, so you never have that anxious moments of when that story comes out. So, and in the end, there was also, between radio and the newspaper, you've got to feel comfortable with what you're saying on radio. Radio is a different media completely than it is. So if you're not comfortable speaking, hand it off to somebody else, because on the radio you want to sound coherent. Now you'll see on 9 News I was completely incoherent, but the reality is you want to sound as coherent as possible, because the reality is they'll just take snippets of, and they can respond to that when they get up here. They're just going to take snippets of what you say, and so be very clear, concise, and to the point on radio, where in newspapers you can kind of go a little bit more, have the conversation, have with the reporter, and if you develop that rapport, you can kind of work with them. And yes, I agree with John. I've had a lot of times where I've said something and I'm like, I try to backtrack it, and I think that's unfair. It's unfair to the reporter unless you say at the beginning, hey, can we talk off the record for a few minutes till I get my thoughts? And if they say yes, if you develop that rapport, you can trust them on that. But if you try to ask them afterwards, what you say is potentially going to get printed, And, between my town council stuff with Basalt, I just got "Soy is not my friend" in the newspaper, about a month ago when Basalt council meetings went meatless. I was like, it's kind of funny until all of a sudden it gets picked up by Denver Post things, and my parents start reading about it, and you're like, soy's not my friend. And so, anyway, and everyone wants to give me a soy sandwich. So, but the reality is I kind of agree with Janice. It's fun to talk to the media, and sometimes I try to avoid it, but for the most part, I enjoy the fact that the story gets told the way we want to tell it. So that's my world.
So myself, like Janice, I'm Karen Kenneman, I'm the Pickens County Public Health Director, and I feel as if this, to be able to tell the health story of our community is so powerful, and for the media to pick up on that and really elevate the work of the community's health is incredible, and really allows us to talk about what really matters in this community. And so I have been in the community for 2.5 years, and I've been working with both radio and print media, and I've just been really impressed with the media in this community, as maybe contrasting to other counties I've worked in, that the media really wants to get it right, that it's important for them to get it right, and they'll really work with you to get it right. And have been really impressed with what I've seen come out in both print and radio. In fact, when I was interviewing with NPR, the reporter, to ease my stress and anxiety, said, "Have you ever heard anyone sound bad on NPR? Like, we'll make you sound good." And they did. So they edited very well. And so I just think, there's a real respect between the media and agencies here, and I really do appreciate that. So with that, I'm going to tell a little story about this kind of relationship, and then add some tips that I think echo a lot of what everyone has said. But so this is a kind of a difficult story, actually, and about a professional interaction with the media, and which wasn't a perfect exchange, to use our president's quote. But I think we got to a good compromise, and I really appreciated, and Curtis's, this is a story about our story. Oh, good. So we'll see the two differing perspectives on this one. But I really appreciate where we got to, and the willingness for the Daily News to compromise. So Public Health has been coordinating a mental health strategic planning process with the community. And we really wanted to hear from the community about their concerns with the mental health system here. And we have a planning committee, and they identified a number of people to join into this community meeting. And so they were handpicked to really provide a diversity of voices in the community and to allow for us to hear from differing perspectives. So that was really the structure of this meeting. And so we had planned it out. It wasn't an open meeting to everyone, but it was a community meeting. And we invited the owner of the Daily News to come, because he's been such a passionate advocate for mental health, I would say, in the community, and really wanted to have his voice as a participant in the meeting, not as a newspaper owner. And then we also invited Curtis to come to have his personal perspective as well. And so both Curtis and Allison reached out to us and said, way ahead of time, and said, we're wondering about our role in this meeting, and what, can we come as reporters, or can Allison come as a reporter? And, sort of what were you looking for? What were you thinking about as far as our presence in the meeting itself? And, it was a completely fair question of, what are we really looking for? And so I reached out to our planning committee and just asked them, what would it be like if we were having, mental health can be a very sensitive topic, and so we're having this meeting where we're really trying to get true perspectives about mental health in our community. We're trying to create this safe space for folks. what do you think? You know, to have a reporter in the room representing as a reporter, not as like a citizen or a member of the community. And everyone felt, because we were trying to create this safe space for the community to say what they needed to say, that having a reporter in the room might stifle that. And really felt like that wasn't what would really create that space for people to be able to talk in an honest way and transparent way. And so Curtis and I went back and forth a couple of times on it, and what I would say the newspaper really compromised on, and where we landed, was to allow for an interview to happen right after the meeting so that I could talk directly with Allison and I could theme out what we heard in the meeting so that there was still some substance and content, but it wasn't specific to an individual person or what really happened specifically detailed in the meeting, but that they could get general themes of what was coming out of the meeting. And then also that we would extend the invitation to folks in the meeting to talk with the press afterward. And so we asked folks, are you willing to talk with the press? We had 4 people that volunteered to talk with Allison afterward, and just asked them to be really sensitive. You can tell your story of your experience in the meeting, but not to tell everyone else's story, and not to, you know, to kind of name names or talk about specifics. And everybody that had agreed to talk with the press agreed to that they would just tell their own individual story. And so, you know, that was the compromise we reached. And I knew it wasn't perfect for the Daily News, and that it, you know, that they really had to work with us to make that happen. But it was so appreciated that there was that professional exchange and the thoughtfulness of the sensitivity of that meeting and the sensitivity of the topic. And so again, it was difficult, and I think it was hard probably on both of our ends. You know, it was a little bit of a compromise, I would say, more on the newspaper's ends, but certainly on our end, to just think about how do we make this work for the type of thing that we were doing. And so with that, you know, I think there are many things that have happened or been discussed down the road here, and I agree with everything that everyone has said so far. And I would just say to keep that working relationship transparent and open with the media, and to work with them, and to realize that it's maybe not always going to exactly work out the way everybody wants, but to have that open dialogue. I know for myself, if I'm doing a press release, to be prepared that day to be able to answer questions. So if I'm busy in meetings and I can't respond to a press release, then I can't respond to what the media is wanting to ask me. So that's just a simple little thing that I've come to terms with, is if we're doing a press release, to be available to the media. I also know for us, we always have data and we always have kind of facts that we need to share. And so I don't usually, I'm always in meetings, so it's hard to take a cold call, but I usually don't take cold calls. I'll call media back so that I have my stuff in front of me and I can make sure that I'm reporting the right information so that I can be prepared and thoughtful in how I respond. So that's just something that I've learned in the last couple of years, is to know myself and to know my stuff, to know my information and to have it in front of me so that I can respond appropriately. If press follows back up, that I have data that I can share back with them. And just to have, those talking points and those sound bites that are important, especially for radio, and to think about those and what those sound like, and to have those prepared ahead of time so that we can help the media do their job. And with my team, you know, they're getting a lot of exposure as well right now with the media, and so we actually put together a guideline to working with the media, and it's almost everything everyone has said so far. So it's very much just here are some guidelines. It's not a policy or anything. It's just, here are some things that you can think about when you work with the media so that you can feel better prepared. So we've just recently created this for our team so that they feel more confident and comfortable working with the media.
Good afternoon. Name's John Kinney. I'm airport director out at Aspen-Pitkin County Airport. Pat, thanks for putting this together. It's a great event. I think some of the things that we've heard is you really don't want to establish those relationships with the media the day of the event. It doesn't go too well that way. So a lot of time spent with them is great. Most of my remarks are going to be on more of a national scale. Pat asked me to talk about a few events that I've been through, and I really would echo what some folks have said directly or indirectly here. The media really does want to get it right here. It was quite shocking. It took me a while to get used to that. John kept saying, no, seriously, you can talk to him. I'm like, really? So keep that in mind in terms of the context. Dealing with the media is much, much tougher in these days because every single person, excuse me, can I use that as a visual? Absolutely, okay, thank you. Behalf of Karen. Every person who has one of these is a reporter. Every single person has a smartphone, they have the video, they have the camera, they have access to social media. And what we have found in some larger scale events is in the first 15 minutes you have over 600,000 impressions worldwide. Try to get that message back. Try to correct that. So if you're not going to be able to get to an event such as use the airport, you're going to have several thousand passengers, several thousand reporters right there front and center getting that information out. I think it was Paris Hilton who was there who tweeted and just had tens upon tens upon tens of thousands.
Country singer, but Paris Hilton.
Okay, let's go with that. On the jet crash at Aspen Airport, excuse me. So it's really difficult when you have the star power coming through and you have a lot of followers. The message gets out even exponentially greater. On the larger events as they go on, monitor social media. It will really save you in the long run. I think most of the events that folks are talking about are individual stories or individual happenings in their respective departments, but when you have events, it's going to go on for 12 to 18 months. I've never had one less than 12 months in terms of a major event, whether it's a crash, whether it's a shooting, whether it's fatalities involved, it just doesn't stop. The first anniversary, the last patient to leave the hospital, the last funeral, the anniversaries of other aspects, the sentencings, the trials, it just doesn't stop. And if you don't have fair or you have, maybe it is fair, but it's poor press coverage, you will relive that over and over and over. Paula Woodward, 9 News, Tony, who's the investigative reporter, used to be Tony Velasco Haynes, I think it was, and they were just rabid that people suffered during the airplane crashes because the ambulances weren't there. We went back to try to recreate a history. Unfortunately, we had to go to 4 different systems. They had 6 different time zones. They were all off a few minutes each to recreate an accurate history. So then they think you're hiding the ball. So exercise some of your abilities within your own department of how do you go back and recreate history, because you will be challenged and asked at a very granular level on a larger event. Think big, because Aspen is going to have the star power. You'll be global, national stage. The media appetite for inside scoop is absolutely insatiable, and it is cutthroat. We have had media get into our command center because they donned a uniform that they found sitting on the ramp.
I want you to first say, when you talk about command center, it wasn't clear to me that you were talking about not here.
Correct, not here.
About experiences that you've had
At other airports when you get to a national stage. But, right, and that's why I prefaced my remarks of, I'm very impressed with the local media. But what I'm trying to convey to you is when you have a big event and the outside media comes to you, it's really difficult. No, that's okay. If my point is being misunderstood, let's skip the video. If you can, do some pre-canned messages to buy yourself some time. And also have some pre-packet information. I think Karen was just showing one that she has to give the media some story. Don't isolate them. They need to and they want to be up front. They want front and center seats so that they can report on the event. If you try to create a media event down at the Intercept lot for an airport event, that's just not going to work. And they will come out from that staging area and find themselves other areas. So work with them in terms of staging areas and get them up front so that they can report the news as it's happening. Have responsive plans to deal with the event, the community, the victims, the injured, deceased, the family and friends, but most importantly, the communication. There is just an insatiable appetite for that communication to take place. So, thank you. The point of this one is, it was the Asiana crash up in San Francisco, and we were part of the. It's a video of a news report, and it just kind of amplified how aggressive some of the approaches were to getting the information and getting the first scoop. And they got so hoodwinked, it's just, I mean, you're going to laugh, and I understand why, but at the same time, the retractions, so you can roll the video, but they just wanted so badly to get the information. Actually, that's not it. It'll come under video. There you go. You want to maybe rewind it, Pat?
On board the flight, they are Captain Sum Ting Wong, Wee Tu Lo, Ho Li Fook, and Bang Ding Ao. The NTSB has confirmed these are the names of the pilots on board Flight 214 when it crashed. We are working to determine exactly what roles each of them played during the landing on Saturday. Investigators will be...
The first time she read that, holy Fuke, you can see her face going, oh my God.
Okay, set it up. This happened where?
So this is the Asiana crash up at San Francisco International Airport. And as I was saying, it's just that the media is in such a frenzy to get the next cutting edge story. An intern with the NTSB was in the command center and just making up names. A reporter did this. He started copying them down. Sent it to the news station. The first time she read this, and about the second name, her face is just kind of getting contorted like, this can't be real. And then you'll see in this story, when it's run the second time, they say the source was the NTSB. They then had to do a series of retractions. So to John's point and other people's points, but I think John was really hammered home, don't guess. It's okay to say you don't know. Or if you're not sure I'm not sure this is accurate, hold it back, because no one has shown any other video about the Asiana crash except for this one to this very day.
Coroner is still trying to determine the cause of death and whether she was already dead when the truck hit her. We have new information now also on the plane crash. KTVU has just learned the names of the 4 pilots who were on board the flight. They are Captain Sum Ting Wong, Wee Tu Lo, Ho Li Fook, and Bang Ding Ao. The NTSB has confirmed these are the names of the pilots on board Flight 214.
Truly unbelievable. 2017 or 18, I can't remember which year that took. Well, no, it would have been 5 years ago. But anyway, so that is some of the insatiable appetites that you will find with the national media, and it just makes it a little tough. And so feed them. Feed the beast, because they are here, and they will show up in the dozens upon dozens and upon dozens. And we get a lot of international visitors here, and then if you have folks who have diplomatic status, you'll have the consulates coming in and other people, and it's just we're such a global market. Be thinking very, very, very big in terms of some of the complexities to respond to these events. So anyway.
All right, so that was the first part. Now we're going to have the members of the local press take the stage, please, and we'll have an opportunity to hear what they think and how they work and what we can do to learn from them. And I think I'm going to let you introduce yourselves, because you can do a better job of it than I can. So why don't we start with Jason?
Jason Hussner from the Aspen Times.
And we'll just go down the line, and then we'll go back to the front and go back down the line.
Gavin Dahl, General Manager of KD&K, former news director.
Curtis Wackerly, editor of the Aspen Daily News.
I'm Tammy Turwell, Executive Director at Aspen Public Radio.
And I'm Kristen Kay, a reporter at Aspen Public Radio.
So just starting If you would just kick off what your experience has been working with government, especially, you've got the county beat, you've had it for a long time. What your experience has been working with Pitkin County and what some of the roadblocks have been for you, perhaps. We want to hear good and bad, how it works for you, how it doesn't work for you, and just some tips of the trade for how we can help you do your job better.
Okay. I think that dealing with Pitkin County is pretty easy for the most part. You know, for me, I don't have a lot to say on it other than call me back. It begins and ends with that. Even if you have nothing to say to me, call me back and tell me that. Don't just ignore me. And also, remember that I work for a daily newspaper. So if you call me back in 2 days, I don't care. It's not generally gonna help me in any way. So that's the main thing. You know, I collect cell phone numbers. That's like gold to a reporter. So that's my main thing. But Pitkin County, I mean, I feel fortunate to not cover the city, frankly, and cover the county is much easier to deal with than I watch my colleague having to deal with some of the things that come up in the city. So I find the county to be pretty easy to deal with and transparent.
For KDNK Radio, we focus a lot down Valley, but of course have a lot of listeners and members in Pitkin County and either side of Carbondale. And I just want to say, kind of in full disclosure, that before I got to KDNK, I worked for the Open Media Foundation, which used to have a relationship with Pitkin County around meeting videos, making sure that archives are searchable, and time stamping those meeting videos. And so I came to my job as news director at KDNK with an awareness of the commitment that Pitkin County has made at the staff level to transparency in terms of public meetings and those archives. And so that for us in radio is really helpful, because if we can't be at every meeting, which we certainly can't with such a small staff, the accessibility to what happens in those public meetings has been a really strong segment of Pitkin County's work. And so I just want to applaud that, but also recognize that in the past, it was something I tried to work to help the county with. But I think that approach of not just the business that's done in public, but also settings like this where we get to interact with each other and kind of seeing that de Tocqueville quote again after 2 years, it says a lot about the thinking at the staff level, and we really appreciate that. I think on the flip side of that, there is a tendency for Pitkin County to forget about the residents in the Redstone area sometimes. So that might be, if I'm trying to find something to give feedback on, we have a lot of KDNK supporters and members down in that area. And I know that's just partly just a geographical challenge, but I think that would be another area where, for example, we've seen with open spaces really clear effort to make sure that those county residents are involved in the process, but might be another thing to keep in mind. I mean, I think you guys have less challenge than Gunnison County does with Marble, but yeah, I just want to applaud the efforts, and I think for KDNK to get to be up with people we respect so much at these other organizations too. We do want to encourage you to remember that KDNK does have a news department and a pretty big reach in terms of audience. We also have a little bit more generous clocks than Aspen Public Radio in terms of that kind of soundbite nature that you get. I'm sure with 9 News, they'll use 3 seconds of what you told them. Probably the least flattering visual, but hopefully at least accurate audio. Okay, yeah. But yeah, that is another thing with KDNK. We tend to have longer segments for stuff. So obviously on coverage we've done around open spaces, that's a good example where we've been able to go really in depth. And I think that's another strong suit of all of our newsrooms is commitment to not just being the shortest soundbite.
Thanks for having us here and putting this together. So I have been with the Daily News going on 14 years now, so it's a pretty long time. Yeah, I think we have a really unique community here, and other than a couple internships out of college, I've never worked as a journalist anywhere else, so sometimes I feel like I don't have some of the perspective that maybe some of you guys have. I would say, I've always appreciated the relationship with almost all the government entities here, but especially Picken County, I think there's so much institutional knowledge in this organization that's really valuable to me as a journalist, and I really appreciate being able to tap into that to tell the stories. You asked us to think of examples. Most of the time, I've never really had the direct county beat, but I kind of parachute in here and there and cover certain things. A lot of times it's open space and trails related. And I was just thinking of the more open space master plan story that we reported on back in June. And I really appreciated the background that open space and trails was able to, that you had in your report. And when you put that out there and said, hey, we're doing an update to the master plan, there was a website ready to go. It had the 2000 master plan on it, so you could go and read it and get the background. I was able to call Gary and call Janet afterward, and I had a couple of questions I wanted to clarify, and they were right there to help me with those answers. And I think that's such a good kind of relationship to have that open level of communication. I appreciate John's reached out to us and just wanted to go get a cup of coffee and sort of build that rapport. And I think that's really valuable to us as well, just to kind of get to know who we're dealing with. So yeah, the only time I could ever say I've ever felt like I haven't encountered a problem is if we feel like we're not getting the call back. I echo what Jason said. That's the most important thing you can do is just call back. And rarely has it ever been an issue, I would say. But that's the number one thing. And maybe we can get back to the public health discussion, because I did have some thoughts on that I wanted to share, but we can do that later.
So I'm the executive director at Aspen Public Radio. I've been in public media for about 20 years, and I believe very strongly in what public radio brings to the media table outside of commercial radio and other types of media. We are beholden to the public, not advertisers, not underwriters, not commercials, not specific people with money or power. It is for the public. I get up every day to serve the public. And that's what I teach my staff. That's what they all embrace. That's why they're in public radio as well. And so we will do our jobs in service to the public. And I'd like to think that public radio has a little more civility than perhaps other media outlets. But our job literally is to hold officials in government accountable. So that's what people believe in us. There's a large trust in public media, and I will never do anything to break that. So that's not to say we're not out for any gotcha, getcha, that sort of a thing. So I echo what the other folks have said here with returning calls and getting back to us. Don't make people read things into why is that person not calling us back? Is there more to the story? So, but I really want to say as the ED, we serve the public first, and our integrity and our truth and our honesty is number one, and we will not compromise that.
I think it's exciting to be in a room where that's everyone's job, right? Is to serve the community and serve the public. And I think Picken County does a great job of that and a great job of communicating. I want to talk a little bit about maybe some radio specific tips. Yes, your interview will probably cut up, but I heard something about make sure that you sound good for radio, because what we really want is the same thing as probably when you're talking to a print reporter. It's just a conversation. So rehearsing that one line in the bathroom mirror probably isn't necessary. We're just there to have a conversation because we want the human voice. That's what we feel like the power of our medium is to hear you as a human. And we do face maybe some time limits that are a little bit different. Sometimes I might have 30 or 45 seconds to tell a story. And so Janice, when you talked about the detail of your job and how you love that, we do too. The discussions in newsrooms were listen to this nitty gritty detail, but unfortunately, I'm sure that everybody has had a time where they've read a story where they're like, the nuance just didn't make it in. And we have that debate all the time about what makes it and what doesn't. But as Tammy said, we serve the public, and if I have 30 seconds to tell the most important parts of the story, sometimes that's a tough call in the newsroom. Also, I think the area that we cover can be a challenge. I think if you're tuned in and you hear a story about Garfield County or even Eagle County and you're like, it's a different story up here in Pickens County, we once again wish that we could talk about everything all the time as radio reporters. If you hear something, they're like, it's a different story, and I'd like to talk to you about what childcare is like up here, or this issue with open space and trails that's a little bit different. Please feel free to reach out. We want to hear that story as well. But sometimes, because we cover the entire Roaring Fork Valley, really all of us up here, we just might have done a story about a different county at that time. Also, please, you can always ask how an interview will be used. Lots of times for Aspen Public Radio, we don't just throw up the whole thing. We do take like a quote or a snippet that is the most powerful, that does speak to the issue, at least that we hope it does. So if you stumble through things, if I ask you a stupid question, it's okay to say, that's not really my department, that's not really what I cover. Please feel free to do that. My last question, this actually came up, my last question in an interview is always, is there anything else that you'd like to cover or anything else that you want to clarify? And I promise that that is not me being like, wink, 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 tell me what you really think. I'm not trying to get you. I really am hoping I'm giving you a chance to clarify, to say, hey, another great person to talk to about this might be so-and-so, and like, let me connect you. I'm not, or like, you know, I mentioned those numbers. I want to take another look at those and get back to you, or like follow up in an email. That's great. That's real. That's what that question is about. Newsletters and press releases. I think, as I said, Pickens County is really communicative, and those are great tools. But we are probably still going to get in your face. We're probably still going to make that call and ask for some of your time. So, Karen, what you said about being available when you send out a press release is great and really helpful, I think, for everybody. You know, I was thinking about like charts and data that you might have access to that you think might help tell that story for the public. If you have some images or photos or anything that you feel like would be helpful, please feel free to send those along and just let us know that you think that would be helpful to be included. Because we're not just on air, we're also a print organization too. So I think that's what I have.
I'm going to just add one more thing about editing, and I don't want to speak for like our news director who's here or for you, but at least for my personal approach, I'm always trying to give the listener the juiciest material out of an interview, right? So if we sit down and have a 10-minute long conversation, and you do a lot of ums and ahs, I'm amazed, even all of us have done some umming and ahhing up here, and we're in the media. I think that's a really key thing for people who are about to sit down for an interview who are not used to doing press, which is part of why I so respect the county's approach. It's not only all filtered through one person. Is that, at least for me, whenever I'm editing an interview, depending on how much time I have, I always try to make every speaker sound their best. It doesn't matter what I think about the issue, if we're giving two different sides, or if it's not even a political thing, whether it's a congressman or a man on the street, I'm trying to give the listener the most direct information I can. So that's, I think, a big thing that just on a personal level, I think a lot of people, even if they know that they're not doing something wrong and we're not trying out to get them or something, but there is sort of a fear of sounding stupid or sounding unconfident, you know, not confident or something. At least for me, and again, I'm not speaking on Kristen's. I don't know Kristen's editing style, but I think that's definitely an approach I have. Is I want the listener to get the most distilled information they can in the short time we have in radio clocks to give those quotes. So if I have a guest who does a lot of umming and ahhing or has verbal tics, I try to remove those for the listener's sake, just so they can get to the point. I won't always get every out of there, and it's important to let someone's real tone come across. I've never intentionally taken someone out of context, but I have absolutely made edits that in the news world, in the print world, you might have like an ellipsis or some other way that you're showing that you haven't run the entire quote. In radio, that we don't have space to say, and then she said some other stuff, and then play the next clip, right? So, but I just want you to know that at least my approach, and I can't speak for every editor in radio, but is definitely to try to help get to the juice of what you have to say.
I just wanted to say that I'm standing over here because we have a camera trained on the place where questions were supposed to come from the audience. Most of our audience today is watching online, but if there's anybody in the room that wants to ask a question, you've got to come over here and do it from here so we can see who you are. And I have a question, I have a question about social media. We talked about the speed with which social media works, and I haven't been a reporter in the news media for many, many years. So back in the day, the scanner, the police scanner, was about as fast as things moved. And there was we learned in journalism school, never get a story or, take information off the scanner without confirming it. But it seems to me, I would imagine that the temptation of social media is so great that you probably at least get the start of a story from social media on the one hand. Now, the thing I was going to ask was, when I write a press release, it's ever so tempting for me to be my own news media, right? So I write the press release. I've got 18 Facebook pages in Picton County, 18 different ones. I can scoop you, actually. I could actually get the story out onto Facebook before you have had an opportunity to print it. So I am conscious of that. And I guess I've answered my own question, but does that bug you when people want to get information out there, but they put it out on their own networks before you've had a chance to actually do your reporting? Does that ever bug you?
I mean, people are going to do what they're going to do. We're not going to beat them. And, especially for us, our goal, if we can be first and accurate, that is great. I would much rather have us be third and more accurate than just getting out there, like we just saw with the airline situation. So I think seeing things on social media that's out there, that's a true competitor for what we do. So I think, I'm not a reporter, but from my standpoint, I don't think that bothers me because we have a different level of trust with our users and listeners to explain it.
And provide context in a way that one of the things you'll notice if you listen to local news on KD&K is almost every single newscast you'll hear headlines attributed to these guys. And I think that's, Ask Me Daily News has this scoop out today. Reporter Curtis said this, and then we're on to the next thing. We don't steal, and we give credit. But I think it's the daily papers that are in the scooping business. Obviously, we originate a lot of content that no one else has, but we don't see that as our role to be first in everything. We can't be comprehensive with 9 FM signals from Leadville to Parachute. So I think to your question, the being mindful about that is great, but I would very often we're getting something off the Pick and Alert system, and then we're going to get that information out to our listeners. The more up to date you are on getting the information out, the better. I personally wouldn't recommend sitting on stuff to try to help out your friends in the media, but I'm curious what the newspapers think.
I mean, once I get an email of a press release, I just assume that it's going to be on social media. So, once it's out there, once it's digital, it's public. So that doesn't particularly bother me.
Yeah, it doesn't bother me at all. Just don't send them out at 4:55.
I know, I got that message last year, the year before, and the year before that.
It is amazing how often we get a press release and then call the number on the press release and they're like, that person's out of office. I don't mean from Pickens County. I mean in general, across all sources. It's just strange to me that part of the function of putting out a press release with a phone number on it is you're looking for coverage. Probably, or you're at least being transparent. Thank you. So it's just, I cannot believe how many times I've made those calls. Again, not as recently now that I'm not the news director, but it just seems like it's almost routine. It's almost like comedic how often there's no answer at the number, or it's like out of office reply, and you're like, why is your name the one on the press release? But that's not something an axe to grind with Pitco per se.
But I would say to our audience, to our people, and to myself, is that when I'm going to send a press release out, and I'm the one that pushes send on those, is to make sure that the person that's quoted in the press release is available for comment. And I don't know that I've always been as vigilant about that as I could be. But for all other departments who are going to be involved in getting information out, we aren't always, not everyone is comfortable sharing their cell phones. But when it comes to media, you almost have to. You almost have to, so that they can find you if you're commuting home or whatever it is. It's almost,
And
it
realize
seems
that
like
8 out of 10 times we're going to call you, that we're going to have a question.
they aren't going to take a press release at face value. They're going to want to write their own story and maybe use it as a prompt, but not take it verbatim.
Or even if we're just going to use the press release, there's going to be something missing. It's just inevitable.
And just to echo what Gary said during your piece, I mean, the story's going to come out, so it's in everyone's interest to have the official who's behind it available, just to provide the information, because it's going to work out better for everyone.
Do you want to ask a couple questions? Huh?
Sure. So,
Oh.
so this was a couple weeks ago now when the county and your stakeholder group, you're doing this process to really drill down on mental health in this community, which is something we're all paying a lot of attention to, and I absolutely agree that this should be a very robust community conversation, and we got these emails inviting us to this community meeting, and I think it's important to know that we're all reporters, and we can't really separate ourselves out from that. We can't, especially if we're being asked to something because of our role in the media. It's really hard to sort of take the hat off and just go and not be looking at something as a journalist. So I get this invitation and I'm reading it and I'm thinking to myself, she's asking us to participate and not report, and I could see that in the language. So I called Karen just because I wanted to kind of clarify that, so we were all on the same page. And I think candidly, to my disappointment, it was actually we don't really want this to be something that's on the record. I mean, I'm certainly glad we had that conversation beforehand, because it would have been really disappointing if we actually showed up and had spent our time on a Tuesday night. I guess I would just say I respect what a kind of sensitive conversation this is, and how do we cover mental health? I mean, it can be really challenging in the media because it's so public. Because it's going to be there for 1,000 years now on the internet, and it's never really going to go away. So how we do it is really important. It's important to be sensitive. I would say we're trying to figure out how, we want to have a more robust conversation. And to me, the best way to do that is to get as close to an issue as possible. So I would really hope that when we're bringing, a diverse group of people from the community together to talk about it, I mean, I feel like we should have a seat at that table, and that we should be able to tell that story to the public, because it's just going to be a better story. It's going to get more people engaged if they can really see what's going on. I absolutely understand that people need to be comfortable. They need to feel safe. I wonder, how much does a reporter being there make a difference? And I honestly can't answer that question. Is it different if John's there as opposed to me? I don't know. These are really interesting questions that I think is actually a really important part of this discussion of how do we tackle this topic. That's something that we're all interested in addressing and having a healthier community. So I appreciate, frankly, that we can talk about it, and that it's something that you're thinking about, that we're thinking about, and we'll just keep working on it, and it'll, we'll get there somehow.
Do you want to ask some questions, John? That kind of speaks to what John and a couple of others said about off the record. What is off the record? What does that mean? And in my experience, which is dated, was that there really isn't anything. There isn't really such thing as off the record. I never felt like you could be completely and totally off the record safely. But that's where you were talking about the nuance between extra information, John, background information, and off the record. But in this meeting, it's almost as if you're saying, if we can't be on the record, then we shouldn't be there.
So when someone says, hey, this is off the record, and if I were to turn around and print that statement, I would have no credibility and no one would ever talk to me. So I understand what that means. I think my experience is when someone says, "Hey, can we talk off the records?" because they really want me to know something. But you know, it's up to me and to take that and use my discretion and how to use it and how to get to a place where it is on the record, but not something that someone necessarily wants their name attached to. So it's an important part of the process. But yeah, I mean, is it not on?
Batteries.
Oh, okay. Got it.
Thanks.
Yeah, we assume that if you're telling us something off the record, it's because you want us to know it because we're journalists, because we are.
I go off the record all the time, and I don't see how you could do your job without doing that. The rule is generally, if you say, let's go off the record, and you continue talking, and the reporter doesn't agree to it, I mean, technically you're not off the record. If that happens and Gary says something to me particularly inflammatory, am I going to do that to him? No, because I need to deal with Gary tomorrow, and he'll never talk to me again if I do that. So if, the rules may, like if it's certainly if it's an adversarial type of thing and they do that and just start going off on somebody and you don't agree with it, like that's certainly fair game, I think. If you're in a situation like that could happen in less of a small town and more of a larger national, situation. But it's a valuable tool. That's how I look at it. You need to know the right questions to ask, and you need to know where to ask them. And a lot of times somebody can tell you that off the record, but don't say where you heard it. And that's.
Can I ask you, Tammy? You've been in such different market sizes. I mean, didn't you come from Chicago before you were in Colorado?
I was all over the place. Chicago, Pittsburgh, Colorado. Did you have a specific question?
Well, yeah, I was just curious. Do you feel like that does make a difference in terms of the relationships, or here everyone knows each other versus in Chicago, not everybody knows each other?
People know each other. Sure. So I think I've been here for almost a year now, and there's definite nuances, to the valley here in Aspen that do not exist outside of here. But I think if you're a reporter and you're doing good journalism, you're going to adhere to it, whether you work for the Times or you work here in the Valley. So, but I can also understand that people, because it's smaller and you spend more time with each other, that it is more of a relationship perhaps than, an alderman rolling their eye because, oh man, that guy from BEZ is here. But I think bottom line, to serve the public, it has to be the truth, it has to be honest, it has to be timely, it has to be what it is. So.
Any other questions? I'm sure you have a question or two. Do you have a question or two? Okay.
So this is it's so weird to be at a podium with as few people here. But this is such a boom or bust market. We've got 2 daily newspapers, population of probably right around 18,000 people. We've got radio stations. So we have periods of feast for stories, and it seems like we have periods of famine. What makes a good story? I'm way too much of a bureaucrat, and every time I float a story, it's like, yeah, that's great, John. What do you guys look for?
I don't know about every time. Give yourself
well,
a
not
little
every
credit.
time, but I may be batting 300.
It's
Hall of Fame numbers.
Just picture, driving home with your wife. What's a story you're going to tell her? What's interesting, basically. What's interesting about something, or what's something that the public needs to know. Whether that's, Highway 82 being closed or embezzlement from the finance department. Both of those things are going to be important for the public to know. So, it can be anything. I was thinking the other day, in fact, it happened in this room when the commissioners were meeting in here. I was bored out of my mind looking at my phone, and I heard Steve Child say something about fish sticks. and it made my ears perk up, and I was like, what? So, it turned out that the fish sticks were actually a part of this resolution, and it was kind of a joking thing, but kind of a serious thing, too. So, normally I wouldn't have written about an IGA between the city and the county, but this one happened to have fish sticks in it. So that's, and that story went all over the state, in fact, all over the country, I think. So, what's interesting?
How many people does it affect? It's one of the filters we put it through.
And I guess who, not just how many, but man, I mean, we're just such a varied community, and are there stories that need to be told that are maybe a little more hidden, I guess, or some voices that need to be highlighted that we don't often hear from? And yeah, what serves the public? What does the public need to know? What can they get involved in? What can they do something about?
Another thing that is really relevant with this group is that Pickens County is often leading the way in the state on different issues. I mean, I think about first meeting Cara when I was still at Open Media Foundation and going to meetings around broadband capacity in the state and different issues where the leadership of folks like John and Phyllis and others has had a significant role in the discussion statewide in a way that locals may not understand at all. So I would just also say, good or bad, maybe picking, we make, I mean, if you're batting 300, right, that's a lot of swings and misses. But I think that there's more untold, there are more untold stories in this valley about the leadership of, like Skadron became a big name in mayoral conversations around the country because of certain policies he did as mayor. That's just an example of, there are a lot of things you guys do that probably we could all talk about more that have impact or a swing in the way things play out across the state. I mean, I think about knowing, as broadband was one of my interests that I wrote about for the Boulder Weekly before I got up here, knowing kind of what John thought around the relationships between the county and state policymakers, for example. Those are significant conversations that might seem like they're not, as important as 82 or something to the day-to-day person, but that there's a story there, and we ought to help people understand the complex, nuanced policy stuff, especially when we're dealing with a county that takes leadership positions on things. I mean, on the flip side of that, Garfield County has been very outspoken on certain issues in very different ways that is also newsworthy. So, I mean, it's not about picking which policies we like or dislike, but I think there's a lot more that Pickens County residents don't even realize the county's doing to try to lead on the issues, that there could be more of a story there that you didn't think of.
So I'll just repeat that for the folks. So John Kenny was asking, so what are the deadlines for each of the organizations?
Yeah, our deadline's 10:30, so everything needs to be wrapped up and sent by 10:30 p.m.
Ours is a little earlier than that, but really, the reporter's deadline is that's probably what's most important. I mean,
Usually 5 o'clock.
5 o'clock. Yeah. The sooner the better. I mean, we all like to eat dinner at home too, if we can, if it's possible.
I second that. I also think if it is an extended interview for radio, we'd love to have that done by early afternoon, so we have time to cut and take out the ums probably for the reporter as well, and make you sound great for
I mean, the quality of the job that gets done is often increased if you have more time to do it. So
Yeah, the earlier the better.
Yeah, the earlier the
Always
better.
the earlier the better.
So like for the print media, you've got to have your stories done by 5. So you're
Well,
needing to.
that's by choice. I mean, if I'm like,
Okay.
Curtis used to have to cover the city council meetings all the time. See, you guys are great because you start at noon. They start at 4. So if that solar farm was that 6 hours, like I would have had to be writing in the meeting and had a story ready to go as that vote happened, because it would have been about half an hour before that has to go to press, so that somebody has something to read that isn't seen by my eyes too, another set of eyes on it. So in those situations, a deadline becomes more important. My 5 o'clock deadline is just so that I can go out and get some exercise before I go home and have dinner.
So one more question. This is probably a little bit more on the personal side, but I think bureaucrats and journalists are sharing an experience right now of maybe having a national dialogue, possibly a local dialogue that isn't so favorable in some cases to our professions. Do you guys experience that locally? And if so, what could be done to help with that?
Well, I think we're lucky in this market. I mean, people tend to be really engaged. I think more people read the papers, listen to the radio stations here on a percentage basis than you see in other communities. And I've never really felt it personally. I mean, there's kind of the online trolls, but even that's really limited here compared to what you see in other markets. So my feeling has always been if you do a good job and have integrity, that people will respect you for that.
Yeah, we get hate mail just like anybody else, but unless it's important, you look at it once and delete it, move on. That's what I do.
I do think you shouldn't always read the comments, but I will say, I think we are lucky. We probably get less pushback than other areas, but in some ways I do think that can inform our practice. Like, how do we become more transparent about what decisions we're making, about what we're printing, about what stories we're following and why we talk to the people we talk to and what that looks like. So I think that it hurts. The unfair criticism hurts, but also some of it might be things that we can take to heart to make us even better and make people trust us more.
Let's not forget the impact that Pickens County has had through the translator service, not just on our 2 stations, but on a whole bunch of media outlets. That's a really unique and very healthy dynamic. That's the county committing to help the public be informed, not only with our regular day-to-day content, but emergency information, even just weather and roads and stuff. So that's definitely a feather in the cap of this county's administration over the many years. It's not a bias for us to say that has helped us increase our service and achieve our mission. So that's really important. I just would add that I do think like the PI's Facebook comments are a really dangerous place to spend very much time. But I still respect the work that is being done there. I've actually spoken to Jerry at the PI about sort of the challenge of what do you do, because they want to allow a space for that kind of communication, but it can be so toxic and often wrong. But I think I just want to reiterate on this subject, I think that the papers are more likely to hear a complaint than a pat on the back. But for every time for the 1 or 2 times I've ever sent Curtis a complaint or a letter to the editor that I didn't like something, there have been 150 times where I was so glad that the papers were covering something in a timely and accurate way. So I think that's also something I hope we all remember, is that for that hate mail that you get, there are thousands of readers who are coming back, listeners coming back, and the membership and budgets of our public radio stations are up and are strong. So in some ways, the enemy of the people talk helps people who appreciate what we do strengthen that support. But at the same time, it can be really scary. My wife used to work at the I probably shouldn't go into this, but my wife used to work at a building in Denver where there was an active shooter, and watching the Twitter, people guessing what was going on, the bad information that went out just made it so much more harrowing for us. This is when I very first moved to work at KDNK. She was still in Denver, and I wish I just wouldn't have looked at any of that, because it made it worse. So I think that there is also, a dynamic where we do need to wait on things. I mean, there was a caller who was devastated to hear that a former KDNK personality had died, called the DJ. The DJ didn't have any reason not to believe the person, but didn't fact check this, announced it on the radio, just a volunteer, meant well, was heartbroken to hear this, the wrong person, you know? And so that, how can we control, I mean, obviously, Tammy's stronger, more effective manager than me and would not let something like this happen. But there's a part of me that's like, what do I do in that situation? The volunteer meant well. They thought, you know, so the only unfiltered, unfact-checked information that ever goes out on KDNK by choice is if someone is calling us, I'm in traffic on 82, there's a giant stop at the Catherine Store exit, we will then say, well, according to a caller, this is the case. We'll try to get more information. But I think that's another advantage that the papers have, is their process is so vetted. Whereas we're with 100+ volunteers on our station, no one's doing that to be evil, but people make mistakes. And so I think that's another thing is we will correct. I think that's a really key thing for you guys in your leadership in your departments, and for other folks watching this, is if we make mistakes, we own them. That's I mean, again, I shouldn't speak for all of you, but I just trust that that's how our organizations work. Those are our values. Sometimes you get someone's name wrong. That's clearly an innocent mistake that you can fix really easily. But I've made one really terrible editing error in my career that was devastatingly, embarrassingly wrong, and within 2 hours, we had it corrected, had apologized to the person who I accidentally said had been assaulted. It was a really big mess. It was just, the person was so glad that I was covering the story, but I, like 18 hours into my day, switched 2 names in my notes. And so, but I mean, but the point is, we own that. Like when we make a mistake, we correct it, because that's our job. That's the thing to do. But we wouldn't claim to be perfect either. So we wouldn't hold you guys to that. You have to be perfect every time standard. I love your value of just stick to the truth in the first place. And when you don't know, say you don't know. I need to do a better job of that. People ask me something, radio ratings, who has the most listeners? I don't know. 5 years ago, KMTS, KJAX, and KDNK had the most listeners in the Valley. I don't have any more information than that currently, for example.
So I think, are there any more questions? What I'd like to do is thank all of you, because this is one of the few opportunities that most of our organization has to even see who you are, what you look like. And Tammy and Kristen, it's the first time I've laid eyes on you, so
Always is
thank you.
disappointment.
We get buried in our work and we
Face for
don't
radio.
get out of our
Much shorter
offices
than I
enough. So I'd like to thank you for that. And you know, we've done this a couple times now, and just seeing you in a different setting than just calling us for information, just having this back and forth is really, really helpful. And I feel really fortunate. And don't get me wrong, this, you know, the boss is here, and I'm not trying to get a raise or anything, but I like the fact that we are a decentralized organization, and having come from a media background myself, I never wanted to talk to a gatekeeper. I rarely wanted to talk to a gatekeeper, and so I really appreciate John's approach. And as you can see, we don't have a policy around it. It's more of a behavior, you know, use your head, speak the truth kind of policy. It's not even a policy. So I hope you knowing that will help you to understand us better. And I thought I heard you say that you were open to going out to coffee. I don't know if every one of you, but maybe others of us in the organization could do a better job of say, hey, you got a little time? I know John tries to do that. He's only got, it's been a while, but he's got a lot on his plate. So we'll remember that we should reach out to you in that sort of way too. And if there are no other questions, I'd just like to thank everybody for being here, and maybe we'll do this again next year. Really appreciate you taking the time.
Thank you.
Thank
for
you.
organizing
Thanks, everyone.
this.
So much.
Thanks.